We have spent most of our lives in some of the most dangerous places on the planet. But with you, there's nothing else. What are you running away from?
We're journalists. We're good at it.
Yesterday's massacres and trying to instigate a media blackout have infuriated the rest of the Egyptian people.
These protesters are making it very clear how willing they are to defy the government.
Peter Greste, Al Jazeera.
Who is it?
Mr. Peter?
Yes, who are you? Are you police?
It's time to go. And?
Hey, tell them we have to stay together.
كلها إعلاء حكومة فما تحاسبنا.
Peter Greste.
And Peter Greste.
Charged with aiding a terrorist group.
You know what's going on here.
We're pawns in a political game.
Portugal. There must be some confusion. I'm just a journalist.
My lawyers told my family that you can be bought cheaply because you have no moral allegiances.
I need to know what you said in your statement.
They know where I live. They know I have a child. Just wanted to go home.
Hello, sir.
This whole world's bloody insane.
Dad, you're not helping.
Al Jazeera is a terrorist organization, and these are their agents.
Muhammad wa Peter Greste.
Killed
Tahir Muhammad.
7 years.
The only way through this is to make a case to the world.
Now is the time for pressure.
I'm nervous as I write this. I've been caught in the middle of a multi-headed political struggle. So our arrest here is not a mistake.
Your letter was very good. There'll be repercussions.
Your voice is becoming an echo chamber in the West.
I can no longer pretend it'll go away by keeping quiet.
We will never give up.
As a journalist, this is my battle.
Talking to Kriv Stenders for his very powerful new true life drama, The Correspondent, feels just about right for me. Not because I've followed his career since it exploded almost over 20 years ago, I guess now, with Blacktown and Boxing Day, or because of his hit film Red Dog, or because of his huge amount of TV work that makes him one of the hardest working filmmakers in the country. But because in 1988, he directed the music video for my favourite Australian song ever, Streets of Your Town by the Go-Betweens. So this makes it a true honour to speak to you, Kriv, and welcome to Screen Space.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you.
Can you indulge me just for a moment before we get to The Correspondent? And I do have it's a wonderful film, and I've got some questions on it that I need to run by you. But I do just want to grill you a bit about your experience with my favourite Aussie band. I hosted Q&As with Lindy Morrison for the doco for Go-Betweens right here. And recall for me what it meant for a young AFTRS grad to get that music video gig.
Well, I'm from Brisbane. And I met the band, quite a few years before that. I was still going to high school up the road.
Oh, wow.
There was a record store in Toowong that the Go-Betweens all worked in. And after school, I would always walk in there and look at records and hang around. And it was kind of like a scene. There was a great kind of little community there. And I got a grant when I was at high school to make a short film, and I was on TV on A Current Affair, because I was this kid that got this grant to make this movie. And I think it was Grant McLennan or one of the bands said, "Hey, you're that kid that was on TV. You make movies, don't you?" And I said, yeah. Well, do you want to make a movie with us? And that started kind of a fantastic sort of relationship with the band. I made a short film that, Grant McLennan had written. I shot it. I was the DP on it. It was directed by a guy called Robin Gold. And that sort of, my connection with the band was sort of seeded then. And then when I got into film school, it was all music videos were, a big industry, or, relatively big industry. And a lot of my colleagues were all making music videos for bands. Yeah. And I kind of, used my insider connection to score the gig.
Oh, it's a wonderful video, and it's a great piece of Australian history. Congratulations, Pat. Let's get to this incredible true story of Peter Greste and how it became your new film, The Correspondent. What elements of his story, the wrongful imprisonment in an Egyptian prison in 2013 and while on assignment for Al Jazeera, did you find most compelling? What did you want to tell about the Peter Greste story?
I guess what I wanted to convey really was the horror of that experience. I mean, films are experiential. That's what I love about cinema, is that you get to live vicariously through a character. You get to kind of be shown a world that you normally wouldn't see or feel or hear or experience. So it was a chance to actually convey the horror of that 400 days, and I saw it as a survival movie, really. I'm a big fan of survival movies. I love, 127 Hours, and, there's so many great survival, like All Is Lost, some really amazing recent survival movies. And I saw it very much in that template, in that mold. It was also a political thriller. It was a courtroom drama. It was a prison movie. I'm a big fan of prison movies. So it had all these great elements to it. And I just felt there was a great script there with Peter Duncan, and it was one of those it was a very simple decision, really, to go, I can make this work. I know how to actually make this film operate. And as a filmmaker, when you know how to do something, and when you get a fire in your belly for it, it sort of becomes an obsession, and you sort of become unstoppable. So once I'd sort of locked onto those elements that I just described, it was on for young and old.
and having Richard Roxburgh by your side to bring Greste to cinematic life, how did you and the actor work together to form your take of the man? And do forgive me, I was doing a bit of research, and literally about 3 minutes before the cameras turned on, I understand you knew Peter from way back.
Yeah, well, it was funny. Years ago, when Carmel Travers, the producer, called me up out of the blue saying, "Hi, I'm Carmel Travers. I got your number from a friend. I've optioned the book, The First Casualty by Peter Greste. Do you know anything about it? Do you know anything about his story?" And I laughed. I said, "Yes, actually, I know Peter. We knew each other as children." Because our fathers are friends, our colleagues. Our fathers are both architects, and they're both Latvian, and they're all from Brisbane. And I met Peter when I was a kid and he was a kid, and obviously, our fathers had stayed friends for a number of decades as we grow up. And then when the story broke, it was big news amongst our families. And then when Carmel obviously said, "Look, I'm making a film about it," I said, "Look, sign me up. I don't even have to read a script. I'm on board."
So I'm sorry, I tried to have my own question then. Working with Roxburgh to craft this portrait of an extraordinary man, what's he like as a talent, and what's the combined Stenders Roxburgh creative experience like?
Well, it's like with any actor, you're collaborators. I always liken actors to, I use a lot of music analogies when I describe my process when I talk about film. I mean, actors are like, I think, really beautiful, unique musical instruments, and they each make their own unique sound, and they have their own unique kind of bandwidth and their own unique kind of timbre and quality and feel and all of that. And some are really difficult to play, which is fine, and some are really easy to play, and Richard is such a beautifully experienced, skilled, deeply empathetic actor that it was such a pleasure to kind of just tap into this character. And a lot of time as a director, you really try and stay out of the way. You really just try and provide the environment in which these actors can do their job and bring the character to life. And it was very much that with Richard. Richard, again, 99% of casting is directing. There's no amount of kind of talking that's going to kind of change anything. They're either right for the role or they're not. Yeah. And Richard was right. He had the spiritual qualities of Peter, and I just allowed him to tap into that, and just gave him the birth that he needed to bring the character to life, and just put the camera where it needed to be, and just support him as much as I could.
What I found fascinating was that a lot of your work over the years examines different aspects of the Australian quote unquote male, like, the male persona of being Australian, from the darker perspectives of Boxing Day or Australia Day to the heroics of Danger Close, even to your docos, the Peter Brock and the Slim Dusties and the Lee Kernaghan. What, and I hope this isn't too vague a question, but what version of the Australian male is Peter Greste?
Gosh, I haven't really thought of my work through that prism, but I guess he is an everyman. He is a guy that's just doing a job, and he's, as I said, he's an intelligent, empathetic human being. The real Peter Greste is an extraordinary man, actually. He's actually quite heroic, I think, and not your normal Australian man. I don't know, but maybe he is as well, in that he's very, very down to earth, very, very connected, and has integrity.
Sure.
So I'm not really quite sure I can answer that question. But
no, I'm also fascinated by the parts of the film that are in flashback, featuring the BBC journalist who sadly passed away, Kate Payton. That seems to be, that played a bigger role in the film than I was expecting, but it's a really powerful use of the flashback tool, and I think paints Peter in an even deeper light.
Yeah, well, look, it's complex. I mean, that's the thing, is that, I think, getting back to your question as well about male or any kind of character, whether male, female, or whatever, every human is complex and every human is flawed. We're not saints. We're all just human. And that's what I loved about the script, and I loved about Peter's story, was that it's also showing that, he's an heroic journalist who's going to kind of stand up for a cause, but he's also human. He's also made mistakes. He's also fallible. And journalism is a risky business, and sometimes, some days you make the wrong call. And that was what that's about. And there is an element of hubris and ego involved. And Peter Greste himself would admit that, and he was very gracious to allow us to kind of present that story in that way, which again says a lot about him, his character. And that's what we really tried to do in the film, is to say, look, this isn't black and white. This isn't like a white savior story. This is someone who's also kind of culpable in a way through his profession. And there is a price to pay when you do this job. It's not all noble and glamorous. There is, like anything, ego and hubris gets in the way.
The Correspondent is part of my favorite genre, which is the honourable journalist, the journalist in a war zone sort of. I consider Warren Beatty's Reds, Roland Joffe's Killing Fields, Nick Nolte in Under Fire, All the President's Men. Of course, these are all some of my favourite films. They're all of an era, with the giant news outlets now aligned with the political views of the billionaires that own them. Can journalism and working journalists like Peter still claim that elevated mantle, even though this is only 11, 12 years old, this story? Can films still be made that sort of hold journalists at that level?
I think so. I think they have to, especially now. It's interesting, when Peter wrote the book and Carmel optioned it, he said, listen, you're going to have to make this film fairly quickly, because it's probably going to go out of date, because he wrote it under the spectre of September 11. When governments were starting to kind of censor journalists if they didn't follow a national line, and he felt that had sort of run out of momentum or steam, and he couldn't be more incorrect, because as we've seen, journalism now has become the most dangerous profession in the world.
Absolutely,
the amount of journalists that are killed every year are rising exponentially. The amount that are arrested for basically standing up to government ideologies being, that number is increasing. So the film has suddenly gained much more relevance than it ever could have. And I think these stories are important to keep reminding us that this is, hang on, just take a second here. This is actually what's at stake. We've built, since for the last 100 years, our democracies have been built on very, very solid foundations, which is transparency, which is accountability, which is objective journalism. And the minute you start breaking that down, we're in danger. And right now, we're probably in the most dangerous point in our history, a modern history where, you've got a country like America where, journalists are banned from the White House. It's like there's an insanity there. And I think if the film does one thing, if it just reminds people and makes them have a conversation like this, then it's done its job.
Yeah, I think you're right. I guess just finally, I consider Kriv Stenders to be one of the consummate craftspeople of our industry. And one of my favorite directors from my youth was John Badham, and one of my favorite contemporary directors is James Mangold. In fact, one of my favorite Australian filmmakers only passed away a couple of weeks ago, a wonderful man called Donald Crombie.
Yeah.
Toss them a script, any genre, with any budget, and they can apply their understanding of the craft of film storytelling to make generally a really fine film. How does that sit with you? Are you happy to be in that sort of my perspective of you?
Oh, I'd love to be. I mean, that'd be an honor. Yeah.
Oh, you absolutely are. Yeah.
No, look, I've been in love with cinema ever since I was a kid, ever since I saw Jaws when I was 10 or 11. To me, it's just the most wonderful medium. And I love all kinds of films. I'm very agnostic. I love European cinema. I love New Wave. I love grindhouse films. I love sci-fi films. I love Spielberg. I love Truffaut. I love Bellatar. I've got a very, very wide and deep taste and passion, and I love it. I love filmmaking because I'm not one of those directors that, even though I started writing, directing, and I want to go back to that. I'm also, a very, I guess, a pragmatic director. I need to work, and that means, going from project to project that I know will happen, because you can develop projects for years that never happen. And I tend to sort of follow my nose and my instincts when I see a story or a project, or when something's brought to me, I go, yeah, I can invest in this. I know how to do this. And I love it, and I also do documentaries and I do television drama. So I do what I do. I cross-train basically through those three different platforms. So yeah, to me, I'd like to think I've got a pretty big wheelhouse, and I love, one of my, even though I'm never comparing myself to Kubrick, but I love Kubrick because he never did the same genre. He always did, and he worked in mainstream genres. He did sci-fi, he did horror, he did war, he did comedy, he did drama, so he was always looking for a genre through which to use as a vehicle to say something or to do something interesting. And in my own little way, I try and do that too. I always think of every film as a beautiful opportunity. Every film that gets made is a miracle, and I'm just grateful to be able to tell a story, whether it's as I said, whether it's a family movie or a kind of social realist drama. It really, they're all the same to me. They're all just stories.
It's great to hear. It's such a refreshing attitude. It's great to be able to finally talk to you, and it's a lot of fun keeping up with your letterbox postings on your Facebook page as well. I'm just checking I'm checking out your last lot, the new Led Zeppelin doco. That was very good. And you like Poor Things, so that's a big plus. Big Yorgos fan generally.
Yeah. Look, again, he's one of those. Like, there's so many. This is one thing I love about films, is that we live in a really, really cynical, dark time. There's a lot of shit going down, but there's always good art being made.
Yep.
There's always great music coming out. There's always great books being written. No matter how bad and how terrible things are, people are still creating art, and they're still doing really great work. And I find that incredibly inspiring and incredibly life affirming, and that's why, and even I find listening to podcasts, like filmmaking podcasts and things, they just remind me, of like, yeah, this is what it's about. It's about the passion. It's about getting up in the morning and having a reason to do something, or a reason to watch something and get inspired by. So, for me, I just love consuming films and being reminded of that same magic that I felt when I first saw Jaws when I was a kid.
Yeah, mate, you've done amazing work with The Correspondent. I hope a lot of people get out and see it through Maslow Entertainment in Australian cinemas from April 17. Kriv Stenders, thank you so much for finally chatting with me. I've had a really good time. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the feedback.